So wherever you are right now, I want you to just reach out in your mind to the nearest door that leads outside.
Right, like an actual exit door.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Not, a door to a bedroom or an interior hallway, but the final heavy door that separates the inside of the building you are currently in from the outside world.
Just picture it in your head.
I guarantee it is incredibly boring.
Oh, it's functionally invisible to you.
Completely invisible. But I want you to look closer at that mental image, because there is a very good chance that the door pushes outward, right, away from you.
Yeah, definitely.
And across the middle of it, sitting right at about, I don't know, the height of your hip, there is likely a plain, horizontal metal bar.
The crash bar.
Right. It's the kind of hardware you don't even really push with your hands. You just sort of like lean your body weight against it. You hear that solid clack of the latch popping, and you are outside.
Just totally effortless.
Yeah. And floating right above that door frame, anchored to the drywall, is a little glowing red box with the word EXIT illuminated inside.
Which is something we see every single day.
Every day. You have walked through 1,000 of these doors, and you have probably never once stopped to think about why they are built that exact way.
Well, which is entirely the point of the design, really. I mean, good safety architecture is meant to operate below the threshold of human notice.
Right. You'd just be automatic.
Exactly. But the reality is that every single feature of that perfectly boring door you just pictured is a gravestone.
A gravestone, meaning this isn't just, arbitrary building code.
Oh, far from it. Every feature of that door, the specific direction the hinges swing, the horizontal bar that yields instantly to your physical weight, the battery-backed illuminated sign hovering above it, all of it was designed by the dead.
Wow.
Specifically, they are the architectural legacy of 602 people who die on a single afternoon.
602 people.
Yeah. December 30th, 1903, in Chicago. They died inside what was, at the very moment of their deaths, the city's most beautiful, technologically advanced, and brand new venue, the Iroquois Theatre.
I mean, 602 people in one afternoon is just, it's staggering. And reading through the historical documents for this deep dive, looking at the contemporary newspaper accounts and the modern fire service analyses from the NFPA.
That's the National Fire Protection Association.
Right, the NFPA. The most chilling detail from all those sources is how they died.
Yeah, because the vast majority of them did not die from the flames.
Which is what you'd expect in a fire.
Of course. But they died in the space of roughly 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes. They were trapped in total darkness, crushed under the weight of each other against exit doors that were bolted shut.
Unbelievable.
Doors that were hidden behind heavy drapes, doors that had no signage, and doors that were physically hinged to open the wrong way.
Which is just terrifying to even picture.
It is. So the door you picture in your mind right now when you think of leaving a building safely, that is entirely their fault, and it is their gift to us.
So to understand how this modern architecture of escape was born from that 15-minute window, we kind of have to travel back to a time when a building was sold to the public with a single fatal word.
Yes, a very specific word.
A word that was printed in bold lettering on every playbill, every advertisement, and every newspaper broadside for this place. And that word was fireproof.
That single word is really the psychological hinge upon which this entire tragedy turns.
It's crazy how much weight that one word carried.
It really is. I mean, you have to remember the psychology of Chicago at the turn of the 20th century. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 had burned the city to the ground just 3 decades prior.
So it's still very fresh in the cultural memory.
Exactly. The city had rebuilt itself with this desperate, almost obsessive focus on overcoming the vulnerability of wood. They started using structural steel, massive brick facades, heavy stone.
They were basically building monuments to their own dominance over nature.
That's a great way to put it. It was an era defined by immense technological and architectural hubris.
Which brings us to late November 1903. The Iroquois Theatre opens its doors in Chicago's Loop District. And by all contemporary accounts, this place was an absolute marvel.
Oh, it was stunning.
We're talking a 6-story showplace featuring massive columns of imported marble, just acres of polished mahogany, and these incredibly plush velvet seats. It was built to be a palace for the everyday public.
But behind all that marble, there was a frantic, desperate rush going on.
Right, because of the money.
Always the money. The management syndicate funding the theater desperately needed to catch the highly lucrative holiday box office season. The financial pressure was just immense.
Because they were behind schedule, right?
Significantly behind schedule. There had been labor strikes that delayed construction for months. So to hit that holiday premiere window, they forced an opening before the building was actually, finished.
It seems like a massive red flag.
A huge one. And to assuage any fears the public might have about walking into a brand new, massive, enclosed structure, their primary marketing claim was that the Iroquois was absolutely fireproof.
Which is such a bizarre claim when you look at the actual physics of what a theater is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a giant room full of fabric and wood.
It is. It relies entirely on a linguistic trick, honestly, whether they intended it or not, about what fireproof actually means.
How so?
Well, to the builders in 1903, fireproof meant the physical shell of the building, the steel girders, the concrete floors, the brick exterior would not collapse in a fire.
Okay, so the structure itself wouldn't fall down.
Exactly. And they were tight about that. The building itself survived the disaster mostly intact. But the label was a powerful psychological shield that blinded everyone to a fundamental reality.
Which was?
They were confusing a fireproof shell with a fire-safe environment.
Ah, I see. It's the exact same mechanism of denial that sank the Titanic just 9 years later.
That is a perfect comparison.
You have this marvel of modern engineering where the sheer arrogance of the creators completely blinds them to the most basic safety necessities. Like if you build a ship and convince yourself the steel hull is mathematically unsinkable, you simply don't bother packing enough lifeboats.
Right, because the lifeboats just become an aesthetic nuisance at that point.
Exactly. And if you build an absolutely fireproof theater, you don't worry about how people are going to get out if something catches fire because you've already decided fire is an impossibility.
The hubris creates an absolute blind spot. And because they were rushing to open for that holiday cash influx, they were welcoming thousands of people into what was effectively an active construction site.
Just wearing a very expensive mahogany disguise.
Precisely. The physical structure was sound, but the operational systems, the very things that keep human beings alive in an emergency, were either incomplete, completely absent, or actively disabled.
And that sets us up for the day of the disaster itself, December 30th, 1903.
A Wednesday.
Right, a Wednesday. It's a bright, bitterly cold winter day in Chicago. The theater is putting on a matinee performance of a wildly popular musical comedy called Mr. Bluebeard.
Starring Eddie Foy.
Yes, Eddie Foy, who is a massive, beloved comedian of the era. And because it's a matinee and it's the week between Christmas and New Year's, the demographic of the crowd inside that building is incredibly specific.
Which just twists the knife of this whole story.
It really does. Who was in the audience?
The audience was overwhelmingly composed of mothers, school teachers, and young children on their holiday break.
Oh, man.
Yeah. The atmosphere inside the Iroquois would have been deafeningly festive.
And the management had packed the house way past any reasonable capacity, right?
Oh, massively. The theater had seating for roughly 1,600 people.
Which is already a huge crowd.
It is, but they kept selling standing room only tickets until the place was jammed with well over 1,700 patrons.
So every seat is taken. People are sitting shoulder to shoulder in the aisles, standing 4 deep in the back of the theater.
Just wall-to-wall people.
And the audience is sitting there in the warm glow of the gaslights, marveling at all that velvet and marble, completely unaware that they are occupying a meticulously constructed trap.
And we use the word trap deliberately here, because the disaster was not just caused by a fire.
Right, a fire is just an event.
Exactly. The mass death was caused by a cascading series of negligent physical compromises that were intentionally built into the architecture of the theater itself.
Reading through the source material on these flaws is honestly just one gut punch after another. You start looking at the building through the lens of modern safety, and the negligence is staggering.
It really is. Where do you even want to start?
Well, first of all, there was no fire alarm in the building.
None. There wasn't even a telephone backstage.
So if a fire broke out, what were they supposed to do?
The protocol was essentially to send a runner sprinting out the stage door, down the alley, and out onto the street to physically pull the lever on a municipal fire alarm box.
Just to summon the horse-drawn fire engines.
Yeah, and there were no automatic sprinklers either.
Unbelievable. But the flaw that really gets me, because it is so actively malicious in its negligence, involves the roof.
Yes. The skylights.
Right. Above the stage, the architects had actually designed something smart. They built these massive ventilation skylights. The theory was sound. If a fire started on stage, these heavy glass and metal skylights were rigged to open automatically. creating a chimney effect.
Which is standard practice now.
Exactly. They would vent the smoke, superheated gases, and flames straight up and out of the building, keeping the toxic environment away from the auditorium.
But the operative word there is theory.
Right. What actually happened?
Because the roof of the theater was still unfinished, and it was the dead of a Chicago winter, the construction workers had taken heavy lumber and physically nailed and fastened those skylights completely shut.
They nailed them shut.
Yes. They disabled the single most important passive safety mechanism in the building purely for the convenience of the construction schedule and, to keep the cold air out of the worksite.
That is just, it's criminal.
Yeah.
Which brings us down from the roof to the ground floor to the exits, because this is where the trap really snapped shut on those 1,700 people.
The egress situation was a nightmare.
The exits inside the auditorium were completely unmarked. There was no glowing red signage, no painted arrows. Worse, several of the exit doors were hidden behind heavy, beautiful velvet draperies.
Yeah, because the management felt that seeing raw wooden or metal doors interrupted the visual flow of the theater's design.
They cared more about the vibes than the exits.
Basically, yes. They prioritized the aesthetic purity of this mahogany palace over the basic spatial awareness of their patrons. But the visual concealment was really only the first layer of the problem.
Right, because once you actually found a door, you encountered the physical barriers. Many of the exit doors were quite literally locked from the inside with deadbolts.
Yes.
I have to stop here, because this is a concept that simply does not compute to a modern mind. Why on earth would you lock the exit doors of a theater holding 1,700 people from the inside while a show is going on?
It is entirely about revenue protection.
Of course it is.
The management syndicate was deeply paranoid about two things. First, they worried about people from the street sneaking into the theater without paying during intermissions when doors might be propped open.
Okay, standard greed.
Right. Second, they were obsessed with class segregation within the theater itself. They didn't want patrons who bought the cheap 50-cent tickets in the upper gallery sneaking down the stairwells into the expensive orchestra seats.
Oh, wow. So they trapped everyone to protect a few dollars.
Exactly. So they bolted the doors shut and placed ushers with keys at certain points. They prioritized stopping a few non-paying patrons over the safety of the nearly 2,000 human beings legally inside the walls.
Okay, so the bolted doors are a literal death sentence. But what about the doors that were technically unlocked?
This is where we get into the ergonomics of panic, which is a really fascinating and terrifying field of study. The unlocked doors were fitted with what were known as continental lever latches.
Continental latches, so not regular doorknobs.
No, these were not standard American round doorknobs that a person in Chicago in 1903 would be used to turning. They were complex European-style mechanisms.
How did they actually work?
They often required a simultaneous or sequential physical action. Like you had to depress a small lever, twist a handle, and sometimes push a sliding mechanism all at once just to release the latch.
That sounds complicated even when you're not in a fire.
Right. Now, in a perfectly calm state, standing in a well-lit lobby, an average person might figure it out after 5 or 10 seconds of fiddling. But we are talking about human beings entering a state of absolute physiological terror.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. When the human brain enters a fight or flight panic state, blood is routed away from the extremities and the prefrontal cortex. You lose fine motor skills. You lose the ability to solve complex spatial puzzles.
You just revert to instinct.
Yes. So in a dark, smoke-filled room with a crowd of terrified people screaming and pressing physically against your back, those continental latches ceased to be door handles. They became unsolvable puzzles.
That is horrifying. And then we arrive at the absolute most fatal flaw of all. The geometry of the doors themselves.
Hinges.
Yes, the exit doors along the walls of the auditorium were hinged to open inward.
They swung directly into the auditorium, into the space occupied by the crowd.
I am genuinely struggling to understand the bureaucratic failure here. How does a city inspector walk into a venue designed to hold nearly 2,000 people, look at heavy wooden doors that swing inward toward the audience, and sign a piece of paper saying this building is safe to open?
Well, it requires understanding the pre-modern safety mindset, which, as we discussed, valued property over human life. But on a more visceral, practical level regarding the city inspectors, the safety inspections of the Iroquois Theatre were an absolute sham.
Just a rubber stamp.
Exactly. The historical record indicates the inspections were entirely cursory. And the mechanism of this corruption wasn't even grand bribery with suitcases of cash. It was the mundane, everyday graft of theater passes.
Complimentary tickets.
Just free tickets. The inspectors were handed free passes to the shows for themselves and their families.
Wow.
In exchange for those tickets, they walked through the building and actively turned a blind eye to the bolted locks, the hidden doors, the nailed-shut skylights, and the inward swinging hinges. They signed the permits so they could go see Mr. Bluebeard for free.
It's just sickening. So the stage is literally set. You have a packed house of 1,700 people, mostly mothers and children. You have no alarm system, no telephone, sealed smoke vents, unmarked exits hidden behind curtains, locked deadbolts, impossible latches, and doors that swing the wrong way.
The trap is perfectly built and fully armed.
All it took was a single spark to test the arrogant promise of absolutely fireproof.
And that spark materialized at roughly 3:15 p.m. during the second act of the performance.
Okay, so let's walk through exactly what happens at 3:20 p.m. The stage crew is trying to create a specific lighting effect, right?
Right, they're using an arc light.
Which is a very early form of high-powered electrical stage lighting. It's meant to throw a soft blue moonlight effect onto the stage for a musical number. Now, an arc light in 1903 is not a sealed, safe LED bulb.
Not at all.
It operates by sending a massive electrical current jumping across a physical gap between two carbon rods. It creates a brilliant, blinding light, but it also creates intense heat. And it is notoriously prone to sputtering and spitting out fragments of white-hot, burning carbon.
It is essentially an open electrical fire being used as a spotlight.
And during this scene, the arc light sparks. A piece of that hot carbon pops off the mechanism, floats through the air, and lands on the edge of a stage curtain made of muslin.
Which is a very light, loosely woven, highly flammable cotton gauze.
Right. The muslin immediately catches fire. Now, a fire on a stage is inherently dangerous, but what makes a theater stage uniquely catastrophic is what hangs directly above it, out of the audience's view.
The fly loft.
Yes. The flames from the muslin quickly race upward into what theater people call the fly loft.
The fly loft is the massive, cavernous space above the stage floor where all the backdrops, the scenery, and the rigging are stored when they aren't being used in a scene.
And what exactly is hanging in the fly loft of the Iroquois for this specific production?
Well, Mr. Bluebeard was an incredibly lavish production. The loft was packed with literally thousands of square feet of canvas scenery.
Thousands of square feet.
Yes, but it's not just plain canvas. It is canvas that has been heavily painted, and the paint used in 1903 is oil-based.
Oh, no.
So you have thousands of square feet of oil-soaked fabric hanging in thin vertical sheets.
It is literally an inverted forest of kindling, and it's perfectly spaced out on rigging lines to allow maximum oxygen flow between the sheets of canvas.
Exactly. The fire found its ideal, mathematically perfect fuel source.
Now, the theater did have some meager defenses, but reading the sources, we just watched them fail one by one in rapid, terrifying succession.
It's agonizing to read.
First, a stagehand sees the muslin catch. He reacts quickly. He grabs a pair of fire extinguishers that the theater had purchased. They were these long tubes of a dry powder chemical called killfire.
Killfire.
What even is that?
It was essentially just tubes filled with sodium bicarbonate baking soda mixed with a few other dry chemicals. The idea was that you throw the powder at the base of a small fire, and the powder smothers the oxygen and releases carbon dioxide.
Which might work if you drop a match in a wastebasket.
Right.
But the stagehand throws this powder at the fire, and it's completely useless. The fire is already racing up the curtains, high into the rafters. The killfire powder just hits the air and drifts back down onto the stage like snow. The first defense is completely neutralized in seconds.
So the stage manager immediately calls for the ultimate, final defense, the massive safety curtain.
The fire curtain. This is a staple of grand theater design.
All right. Absolutely. The entire concept is that if a massive fire breaks out in that kindling forest of the fly loft, you pull a lever and drop a heavy, impenetrable, fireproof curtain to physically separate the stage from the auditorium.
You sacrifice the stage to save the audience.
Exactly. You seal the fire behind a wall, buying the 1,700 people in the audience enough time to calmly walk out the doors.
So the stagehands scramble to release the brake on the curtain. It starts to drop. But on the way down, the massive heavy curtain snags on a specialized wire reflector, a light fixture that was protruding out from the side wall of the stage arch.
Just a single light fixture in the wrong place.
The curtain catches on the metal, twists and jams. It stops dead in its tracks, leaving a massive, gaping gap perhaps 20 feet high between the bottom edge of the curtain and the wooden stage floor.
But even the part of the curtain that did drop was a complete lie, wasn't it?
It was. And this is where the cost-cutting becomes actively lethal. This curtain was widely, proudly touted by the theater's management to the press and the public as being made of solid asbestos.
Right, asbestos.
Now, asbestos, for all the horrific respiratory health hazards we associate with it today, is miraculously fire-resistant. It simply will not burn. A true, heavy asbestos curtain would have held back a massive amount of radiant heat.
It would have worked.
It would have. But historical analysis of the disaster and testimony from the aftermath indicate that this curtain was not true, pure asbestos.
Why? Was it supply chain issues or?
Pure cost-cutting and a complete lack of regulatory material testing. The manufacturers could weave a tiny thread of asbestos wire into a much cheaper matrix of materials and legally stamp it as an asbestos curtain.
A technicality.
According to investigators, the Iroquois curtain was reportedly a cheap, woven mixture of cotton and wood pulp, with perhaps a minuscule amount of asbestos wire holding it together.
Cotton and wood pulp. They built a fire shield out of paper and cloth.
It was highly combustible. It was the physical manifestation of the theater's empty promises. The absolutely fireproof theater attempted to protect its audience with a wall of wood pulp, and within moments, the fire in the loft ignited the curtain itself.
So as these defenses fail, the situation on the stage turns from an emergency into an uncontrolled disaster.
But here is where we cross the line from a localized, tragic fire into a mass casualty event of historic proportions. And it all comes down to an ordinary, unforgiving law of thermodynamics.
The physics of a catastrophe are entirely devoid of mercy.
I want to focus on Eddie Foy for a moment.
The comedian.
Yeah. He's on stage when the muslin catches. He's half in costume for his next scene. The fire is rapidly expanding above his head, raining burning debris down onto the stage floor. Foy does something genuinely heroic.
What does he do?
He realizes the danger instantly. His young son was visiting him backstage that day. Foy grabs his son, shoves him into the arms of a stagehand, and screams at them to run out the back loading doors to the street. He ensures his own blood is safe.
Wow.
But Foy doesn't follow them.
He stays. He steps forward, walking right to the footlights at the very edge of the stage, directly facing the massive crowd.
The audience is starting to murmur. They see the glow. They hear the shouting backstage. Foy raises his hands and begs the crowd to stay calm. He tells them it's just a small fire, that the fire department is on the way. He literally shouts at the orchestra conductor, commanding the musicians to keep playing their instruments to maintain an air of normalcy and prevent a stampede.
And remarkably, incredibly, the crowd holds. They stay in their seats.
Which is amazing.
It is, but you have to put yourself in their shoes. They trusted the architectural promise. They implicitly believed they were sitting in the safest, most fireproof building in the state of Illinois, and they trusted the authority figure on stage telling them to stay calm.
But while Foy is holding the crowd in the front, pure panic has completely taken over backstage. Hundreds of performers, chorus girls, stagehands, and technicians are fleeing for their lives.
Understandably.
They're sprinting to the massive rear stage doors, the huge double doors used for loading massive scenery sets in and out of the building. They throw these massive doors wide open and run out into the freezing winter alleyway.
And this is where the thermodynamics take over. The theater's flyloft is currently acting like a massive chimney full of superheated air and expanding combustion gases.
Right.
But remember, the roofers had nailed the ventilation skylight shut.
Oh.
So all that expanding pressure has nowhere to vent upward. When those massive rear-loading doors were flung open by the fleeing cast, it created an enormous pressure differential.
Explain exactly what that means physically for the listener.
Sure. It allowed a massive, sudden inrush of dense, freezing, oxygen-rich winter air to aggressively enter the building from the alley. When that wall of cold, dense oxygen hit the superheated, oxygen-starved atmosphere of the burning flyloft, the stage area effectively became the combustion chamber of a massive engine.
It just fed the beast.
Exactly. The cold air rushed in, expanded violently as it instantly heated, fed a massive amount of oxygen to the burning oil paint, and created an enormous backdraft.
It's essentially an explosion of air.
It is. And because the roof vents were nailed shut, that explosive wave of expanding pressure had to find an exit. It took the path of least resistance.
Which was straight toward the audience.
Yes. The bellows effect drove a rolling ball of superheated fire, toxic gas, and burning debris out from under the gap of that jammed wood pulp curtain.
Like a flamethrower.
Exactly. It shot horizontally directly across the auditorium, instantly incinerating everything in its path, and the physical shape of the theater forced the fireball to blast straight upward, directly into the upper gallery balconies where the cheapest tickets were sold.
The moment that fireball rolls out over the orchestra pit, The spell is broken. Eddie Foy's assurances mean nothing. The orchestra stops playing instantly as the musicians literally drop their instruments and dive under the stage.
The panic sets in.
The 1,700 people in the crowd finally realize the reality of the trap they are sitting in, and the stampede for the exits begins.
And this is where the lethal architecture of the building finishes the job the fire started.
The crowd runs for the walls, they hit those heavy velvet drapes, they claw them down in the dark, only to find solid, bolted wooden doors behind them.
Just dead ends.
They find the unlocked doors, but their panic-stricken, trembling hands are violently fumbling with those strange, continental lever latches they can't understand. And then, for the doors that did manage to get unlatched, we hit the deadliest failure of all: the inward swinging geometry.
This is where we have to rely on clinical restraint to describe what happens next, because the reality is horrifying. It is a terrifying exercise in ordinary, unyielding geometry.
I want to give you, the listener, an analogy here that explains the physics of this trap. Think of a Chinese finger trap. The harder you pull to escape, the tighter the woven bamboo constricts around your fingers.
That's exactly right.
The physics of an inward swinging door in a panic operate on the exact same principle. Imagine you are the first person to reach an exit door. You grab the handle, and you try to pull the heavy wooden door inward toward your own chest to swing it open.
Just a normal motion.
But in the 3 seconds it takes you to do that, a wall of hundreds of terrified, screaming people hits you from behind. They are pushing forward with all their physical strength to escape the toxic smoke and the heat. They press you completely flat against the wood of the door.
A door cannot open toward a panicking crowd because a mass of the crowd is literally occupying the physical space the door requires to complete its arc of a swing.
It becomes a physical impossibility. The harder the crowd pushed forward to escape the theater, the more thousands of pounds of pressure they applied to seal the exit doors permanently shut.
The pressure of a human crush is an immense, almost unimaginable force. It only takes a few people pressing against your chest to restrict your diaphragm's ability to expand. When you have hundreds of human beings pressing against a locked or inward swinging door, it creates a literal compressed wall of flesh and bone.
Our sources emphasize a clinical reality here, and I think it is vital we honor the victims by being precise about how they died. We don't need to lean into melodrama or sensationalism. The cold math is horrifying enough.
It speaks for itself.
The vast majority of the victims of the Iroquois Theatre fire did not burn to death. They died in massive, tangled piles at the base of the stairwells and compacted against those exit doors. They died from blunt force crush injuries, from trampling, and predominantly from compressive asphyxiation.
Compressive asphyxiation means the physical weight of the people around and on top of you is so great that your rib cage simply cannot expand to draw in breath, regardless of the smoke in the air.
You just suffocate under the weight of panic.
Yes. The architecture they trusted, the doors they desperately needed, became the exact instruments of their death.
Some people, mostly in the upper balconies, did manage to break through a few of the doors and reach the exterior fire escapes bolted to the alley side of the building.
But even that was a trap.
Right, because remember, the theater opened before it was finished. The fire escapes were completely incomplete. They lacked ladders down to the street level. They were slick with ice from the Chicago winter.
Just a sheer drop.
Some of the platforms literally just ended in midair, 50 feet above the ground. People with fire pouring out the doors behind them were forced to leap or were simply pushed by the crowd behind them, falling onto the frozen cobblestones of the alley below.
The timeline of all this destruction is what makes it so incredibly shocking to modern safety analysts. Within roughly 15 minutes of that arc light spitting carbon onto the muslin, the first horse-drawn fire engines arrived in the alley.
15 minutes?
Yes, and when those firemen breached the doors and walked into the auditorium of the Iroquois Theatre, the massive space was already nearly silent.
15 minutes. You could listen to half a deep dive in that time. You could brew a pot of coffee.
In just 15 minutes, at least 602 people were dead in a building that was exactly 5 weeks old. To this day, well over a century later, it remains the deadliest single-building fire in United States history.
602 people, entire families wiped out, classrooms of children gone. But as we dig deeper into the source material, into the newspaper archives and the court transcripts, the visceral horror of the fire itself is about to be matched, and perhaps even exceeded, by the cold, systemic horror of the justice system in the aftermath.
The aftermath of the Iroquois is where the tragedy pivots from an engineering and architectural failure into a profound, deliberate institutional and legal failure.
The city of Chicago convulses in the days following December 30th. The entire city is plunged into mourning. But that morning very quickly curdles into white-hot rage.
People wanted answers.
The coroner's inquest and the city investigations begin immediately, and within days they lay bare exactly how this trap was built. Everything we just discussed, the bolted doors to protect 50-cent tickets, the curtained exits to preserve the interior decorating, the nailed vents for the convenience of the roofers, the graft of the inspectors, it all becomes glaring public knowledge on the front pages of the newspapers.
The public demanded immediate, severe accountability. And initially, it genuinely seemed like the legal machinery of Chicago was going to provide it.
It looked like justice was coming.
It did. The grand jury acted aggressively. Indictments rained down on everyone involved. They criminally indicted the theater owners, the management syndicate, the city building commissioner, the fire inspectors, and they even brought charges against Carter Harrison Jr., the mayor of Chicago himself.
For failing to enforce his own city's building codes.
Exactly.
And reading this part of the history, you feel a sense of, okay, justice is coming. The system works. They are going to hold these powerful men responsible for building a death trap that killed 600 women and children.
You'd think so.
But then, as you turn the pages of the court records, month by month, year by year, one by one, every single indictment completely dissolves. They vanish into thin air based on the most infuriating legal technicalities you can imagine.
The defense attorneys for the wealthy syndicate employed a strategy of endless attrition and jurisdictional obfuscation. A judge rules that a specific building ordinance regarding fire alarms was improperly drafted by the city council, therefore it can't be enforced criminally.
So they toss that charge.
Right. Then another judge rules that the wealthy theater managers who ordered the doors locked couldn't be held criminally liable for the actions of the lower-level ushers who physically turned the keys.
Shifting the blame down.
Always. Jurisdiction is repeatedly questioned. Endless change of venue motions are filed, dragging the trials out to neighboring counties where the jury pools were less emotionally invested. Delay after delay after delay until the public's rage simply exhausted itself.
It highlights a bleak, empty vacuum at the very center of the Iroquois story. What's fascinating and deeply, deeply disturbing is that there was no grand, shadowy conspiracy here. It wasn't a cabal of evil cartoon villains plotting a mass murder in a smoky back room.
No, it was just systemic, banal indifference. It was the era's legal machinery operating exactly the way it was designed to operate.
Protecting wealth, protecting capital, protecting corporate liability, and protecting physical property over the lives of everyday citizens.
That's exactly it.
I feel a cold fury on behalf of you, the listener, right now. How is it fundamentally possible that a tragedy of this magnitude, born of such incredibly obvious, documented negligence? I mean, we have physical evidence that they nailed the smoke fence shut, goes entirely unpunished.
It's maddening.
Out of everyone involved, all the wealthy investors who funded the rush, all the managers who ordered the deadbolts, all the city officials who took free theater tickets to sign off on a death trap. Do you know who the only human being to serve actual jail time was?
It was a local saloon keeper.
No, bartender. A saloon keeper.
Yes. His establishment was located in the alley directly near the theater. In the absolute chaos of those first few hours, rescue workers were pulling bodies out of the theater and temporarily laying them out in his bar because it was warm and off the street. He was later convicted of slipping rings off the fingers and stealing wallets from the corpses laid out on his floor. That man, a petty thief, is the only person who went to a prison cell in connection with an event that killed 602 people.
Okay, so the criminal justice system completely fails. What about the civil system? Did the families of the victims at least get financial compensation from the theater syndicate? Did they sue them into oblivion?
Not a single victim's family ever collected a single cent in civil damages from the Iroquois Theatre Company.
Nothing.
Nothing. The corporate syndicate utilized bankruptcy laws masterfully. They declared the specific shell company that operated the theater bankrupt, reorganized their corporate structure, shielded all their actual assets, and walked away. The families were left with absolutely nothing but funeral bills and their grief.
So the victims couldn't get justice in the criminal courtroom. They couldn't get financial accountability from the men who built the trap. But as our NFPA source materials point out, their legacy was not entirely erased by the lawyers.
No, it wasn't.
Because they couldn't get justice in the courts, their legacy was instead written into the very walls, doors, and hallways of our modern society.
Exactly. The sheer scale and shock of the Iroquois fire spurred sweeping fire safety reform almost overnight. Because the legal system fundamentally failed to punish the individuals responsible, the civic system was forced to change the physical environment itself to ensure this specific combination of physics and panic could never happen again.
Let's trace these echoes, because this is where we finally get back to that boring everyday door we asked you to picture at the beginning of the show.
The physical legacy.
The city of Chicago, terrified of public revolt, immediately shut down scores of theaters, public halls, and churches for mandatory reinspection. They realized that if the Iroquois, their newest crowning jewel, was a trap, the rest of the aging city was likely a massive tinderbox.
And it wasn't just Chicago. New York and other major cities across the country rapidly rewrote their municipal building codes. And over the following decades, these reactive, localized laws flowed into and formed the foundation of what we now know as the Modern Life Safety Code.
NFPA 101.
Right, which is the massive document that dictates the design of virtually every commercial and public building you step into today.
We can draw a direct, unbroken line, mapping the specific mechanisms of how people died in the Iroquois to the specific physical innovations we rely on to keep us alive today. Let's go through them.
Okay.
First, the most obvious one, the geometry. Because inward swinging doors acted as a Chinese finger trap and crushed people to death.
Public exit doors in any place of assembly are now legally, strictly required to open outward. They must push out into the street, the alley, or the egress corridor. They must move dynamically with the directional flow of an escaping crowd, not against it.
Second, because unfamiliar, complicated European lever latches trapped terrified people whose brains were in a state of fight-or-flight panic.
We got the invention of the panic bar.
Also known as the crash bar or the horizontal push-release hardware.
Exactly. The development of this specific device was directly spurred by the haunting accounts of this fire. The most famous early version, the Von Duprin device, is widely credited to a hardware salesman named Carl Prinzler.
How was he involved?
He was actually supposed to be at the Iroquois that day, but missed the show. He was so deeply haunted by the accounts of the mangled bodies piled against the latches that he teamed up with an engineer to invent a lock that required zero cognitive thought to operate.
That's the genius of the panic bar. It's a profound mechanical translation of human behavior. It takes the exact physical force that killed people in 1903, the crushing, falling weight of a panicked crowd pressing forward against a door, and makes that exact force the very mechanism that releases the latch.
It turns the panic into the key.
You don't have to think. You don't need fine motor skills. A falling unconscious body can trigger a panic bar just by collapsing against it.
Precisely. Third connection. Because exits in the Iroquois were hidden behind velvet drapes to preserve the mahogany aesthetic, and because the theater was plunged into total darkness when the gas and electrical lights failed.
Modern building codes now aggressively mandate illuminated, highly visible exit signs, typically in high contrast red or green. Furthermore, they mandate emergency lighting systems that operate on independent backup battery power.
The exits must be clearly marked, illuminated at all times.
And it is entirely illegal to hide them behind curtains or decorative finishes. Aesthetics can never supersede egress.
And finally, because the asbestos curtain was a wood pulp lie, and the smoke vents were nailed shut for convenience.
Modern codes require rigorously maintained, physically tested fire curtains that deploy automatically. They require integrated automatic fire alarm systems with pull stations, functional and regularly inspected smoke venting systems, and, crucially, strict occupancy limits.
The math of occupancy is written in the blood of the Iroquois. NFPA 101 uses strict mathematical formulas to calculate exactly how many human beings are allowed in a room based on the total width in inches of the available egress doors. You cannot just sell standing room tickets until the aisles are jammed anymore. The capacity is dictated by the architecture's ability to empty the room in a specific number of minutes.
So every single time you see a small metal sign in a restaurant that says maximum occupancy, 1 in 50, every time you casually lean your hip into a panic bar on an outward swinging door, every time you glance up at a growing red exit sign at the movie theater, you are looking at the direct physical result of 602 people dying in 1903.
Their terrifying final moments became the permanent blueprint for modern safety.
Which makes something else in our source material incredibly frustrating, honestly a bit insulting. Our notes bring up that today, if you go to Chicago, there are these very popular ghost tours.
Oh yeah, I've seen those.
They market the specific alleyway behind where the Iroquois stood the alley, where the unfinished fire escapes dropped people onto the cobblestones, the alley where the bodies were stacked. They market it as a haunted alley. They sell tickets to tourists, promising they'll feel cold spots or that their cameras will capture orbs or that they'll hear the voices of restless spirits.
It is a profound disservice to history, and it is something we have to firmly, categorically reject based on the sources.
Why do you think people gravitate so easily towards the ghost story instead of the actual history of what happened on that site?
Because psychologically, we vastly prefer ghost stories. A ghost is just a story, and a story can be closed like a book. It's spooky, it provides a little adrenaline thrill, and then you go home to your safe house and sleep.
It's safe entertainment.
Exactly. Facing the reality of the Iroquois is much, much harder. Facing the reality means acknowledging that 600 people, overwhelmingly mothers and young children on a holiday outing, died horrifically not because of the supernatural, but due to corrupt accounting, systemic municipal graft, cost-cutting supply chains, and bad physical geometry.
Which is way scarier than a ghost.
It means acknowledging that the institutions built to protect them failed them entirely, and the wealthy men who caused it walked away completely free.
The honest truth of the Iroquois Theatre is not floating in some imaginary cold spot in a haunted alley. The truth is bolted to the door. The safest, most boring, most invisible objects in our daily lives carry the absolute heaviest debts. We lean on them every single day, completely unthinking, blissfully unaware of the sheer amount of blood that was paid to design them.
And that is the true, enduring legacy of the Iroquois. Not ghosts, but the architecture of survival.
Well, we want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the 15 minutes that completely re-engineered the physical world around us. I promise you, the next time you walk out of a grocery store, an office building, or a theater, you will never look at an exit door the same way again.
You won't be able to.
You'll see the panic bar, the outward swing, the red sign, and you will know exactly why they are there and exactly who paid for them.
Knowledge like this fundamentally changes how you walk through the physical world. It makes the invisible systems visible.
It really does. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on everything we've just discussed. Today, if you turn on the news, scroll through social media, or listen to debates about civic planning, we frequently hear loud complaints about building codes, OSHA safety regulations, and municipal compliance checks.
You hear it all the time.
They are very often dismissed by developers and politicians as nothing more than bureaucratic, red tape, annoying rules that just slow down the speed of business, stifle architectural innovation, and cost developers far too much money.
It's always framed as an obstacle.
But the legacy of the Iroquois Theatre reminds us with brutal clarity that every single line of that red tape is quite literally written in blood. The next time we hear a call to deregulate safety in the name of economic efficiency or speeding up construction, we should pause and ask ourselves a very serious question. Are we quietly, arrogantly unwriting the very lessons that 600 people died to teach us?